plenty of horror viewers spend their time hoping the cast won't get chopped up. It's safe to say you'd be pretty disappointed if you left the theatre with a kill count of 0. Thus, there's always a guarantee that plenty of characters are about to meet their maker. But sometimes you get a slap in the face as someone who you expected to bite the bullet makes it out alive. I'm Ellie with What Culture, here with unexpected horror movie survivors. The Mother in the Mist. As far as Stephen King adaptations go, The Mist is one that stands tall as pretty decent. It told the story of a collection of people seeking refuge in a supermarket from a terrifying mist that engulfed their town and brought with it some terrifying beasties. This character was so destined for the chopping block that she didn't even get a name. Her fate seemed set after she left the safety of the grocery store and ventured out into the titular mist to find her kids. Anyone used to horror knew the drill here. She was D to the E to the A to the D. But then, that ending came along. If you don't already know the Mist's grueling ending, then you're in for a doozy. It showed as the protagonist, his kid, and a few survivors decided their situation was hopeless. Rather than being eaten by monsters, the hero decided to use a gun to end their suffering. But just after this happened, the mist cleared and out popped this lady, kids in hand, having survived the whole ordeal and brought the cavalry to help. Oh dear God. So not only did she become an unexpected survivor, but she also became the catalyst for one of horror's bleakest finales. Carla Wilson in I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. When Carla came along in the less than favourable follow-up to the classic slasher hit I Know What You Did Last Summer, viewers could only think one thing. Damn, this girl is toast. This is because she had not one, not two, but 3 classic horror tropes working against her. Yet, somehow, she pulled through with only some major scrapes. Carla was brought in to act as the protagonist's new best friend after she lost all her closest pals in the previous film. This was her first sign of danger, as the leading character's best friend almost always bites the bullet. Then there was the fact that she was a black woman. Let's just say, statistically speaking, horror tends to get a little unfair when it comes to picking its victims in that regard. And finally, there's the fact that she was played by the famous musician Brandy. Typically, once a mainstream performer enters the horror movie fray, you can expect they won't get the same kind of royalties as in the music industry. To add insult to all those injuries, she even suffered some, injuries. She took a fishhook to the foot and even fell through a glass door. Still, once Julie returned to her hotel, she found Carla safe and sound, albeit sporting a nasty limp. Tennessee in Alien Covenant. The man made goofy jokes, wore a cowboy hat, and was played by the popular comedian Danny McBride. He had cannon fodder written all over him. The Alien franchise is one that's gone through heights as high as a spaceship and lows as deep as the Mariana Trench. Alien Covenant sits there mostly in between the two, as a not-so-great but not too terrible chapter in the saga. Danny McBride's Tennessee Farris was a welcome sight in the film, proposing a slightly more serious role for McBride and adding a bit of variety to the cast. Still, it seemed rather obvious that he would find himself dead at the hands of a rogue android or the terrifying Praetomorph. His character was never shown to be particularly savvy with survival. Hell, he was even the one who put everyone in danger after getting hyped up on the transmission of someone singing Country Roads. But when the finale came, he and Daniels made it off-world. Of course, the implication of the ending, with him stuck in hypersleep under the terrifying David, did spell bad news for his future. But still, the fact that Kenny Powers made it all the way through the runtime of an Alien movie is a miracle in itself. Shigaharu Aoyama in Audition. If you've not had the chance to watch Takashi Miike's unsettling masterpiece Audition yet, then you'd better get on it. It tells the story of a widowed man who lets his friend set up a mock movie audition with the purpose of finding him a new wife, cause that's not creepy at all. This search results in him meeting the mysterious yet alluring Asami, who seems perfect, but of course things aren't always how they appear. Watching Audition seems like an inevitable tumble into a gruesome murder, as it's clear Asami is gearing up for a brutal kill here with Aoyama as the target. As their relationship sours and her sordid past reveals itself, you begin thinking he'd better start putting his affairs in order. The movie culminates with a shocking torture scene where the unfortunate, if still creepy, auditioner gets drugged with a paralytic agent, then has needles shoved in his face and his foot sawed off with a wire. When watching this for the first time, you'd think you're right on the money in predicting Aoyama's grisly end. But his son returns home and after a struggle, Asami is left dead. Now that was unexpected. Davey in summer of '84. If you're sick and tired of the 80s nostalgia-heavy horror trend that has overtaken Hollywood in the last decade, then you might look at this flick as one to throw into the bargain bin. But if you did that, you'd be missing out on a stunning scary movie with a well-executed mystery and a finale that will leave you reeling. While other kids his age were off skateboarding or wasting quarters at the arcade, Davey obsesses over the macabre. This leads him to suspect that his neighbour is a serial killer, so he and a group of friends spend their summer investigating him. Wow, talk about memories. It's eventually revealed that Davey's neighbour is in fact a serial killer. The film does a great job of keeping the mystery though, and he responds to his exposure by kidnapping Davey and his friend Woody and playing a game of manhunt with them. It seems obvious that the movie will suffer a harrowing ending with Davey meeting his maker, but it's somehow even worse. Rather than killing him, the villain kills Woody and forces Davey to live, spending the rest of his life feeling guilt and paranoia that he might return. It's utterly devastating, takes you by surprise, and makes you wonder if, in some twisted way, he might have been better off dead. Kazan in Cube. Cube is a dizzyingly sick and slick sci-fi horror that throws gore, games, and an eye-catching aesthetic your way. It's also an incredibly subversive movie that plays with the archetypal roles viewers have come to expect from the horror genre, especially by tricking you into rooting for a hero who eventually becomes the villain. Still, despite how many tropes the movie challenges, it still surprised everyone to see this character become the sole survivor. When trapped inside the titular cube, the characters were forced to complete games and trials to survive. Eventually, they stumbled across a young man with learning difficulties. This character, Kazan, ended up being both a blessing and a curse, as his ability to perform high-concept maths helped them navigate the cube. But his condition also hindered the group's involvement in the games and caused plenty of tension. Thanks to this, it seemed clear that he would struggle to make it out alive, not just because the games were challenging, but because the terrifying Quentin seemed to have it in for him. But in the end, not only did he miraculously escape, but he was the only one. Viewers were surprised, but also pretty delighted, as he was a genuinely likeable character. Gabe in Us. A sweet, caring, funny, and likeable dad. Oh yeah, that guy's dead. He's dead before the opening credits even start rolling. Wait, he survives? Well, fair play, Gabe, fair play. It's common in horror to create a likeable figure to kill and use as a catalyst for character development. Not only did Gabe have the vibe of a dead dad floating all around him, but he even made a slew of mistakes that seemed to be leading up to his demise. For example, in one scene, he left his family behind in the house to approach the creepy strangers outside. Has this man ever seen a horror film? Of course, in the end, every family member survived, which was a huge surprise. It seemed clear that at least one of them would perish, as that's what you expect from horror, and Gabe seemed like the most likely candidate. Crystal May in The Hunt. Sometimes, being outside the 1% can make it feel like the odds are stacked against you. So imagine a movie where wealthy elites hunt down the working class. You probably shouldn't expect to come out of that day trip with your head intact. That's where Crystal May comes in. Played impressively by Betty Gilpin, Crystal is the Rambo-like hero of this thriller, as she takes the fight to the hunters and shows they've bitten off more than they can chew. Although she's undeniably badass, it was still a surprise when she reached the end credits. She's an unexpected survivor on 2 counts. The first is that the film deliberately suckers you in with fake-out protagonists. You follow Emma Roberts at first, assuming she's the lead, then boom, bullet in the head. The same thing happens with Ike Barinholtz's character afterwards. Thus, everyone expected to have the rug pulled out from under them again after Crystal took over, but she was not such a weakling. The other unexpected survival factor came during her savage showdown at the film's climax. She and the villain Athena tore the place down, and both suffered fatal wounds, implying mutually assured destruction. But once the dust had settled, she managed to hop up, fix her injuries, and stroll away with a nice bottle of champagne. Crystal, you earned those bubbles. John Pass in Possessor. There are a lot of things you need to suspend your disbelief for in a sci-fi movie like this. You've got technology capable of letting assassins possess people near their targets, secret organizations, and all sorts of sci-fi elements that you've got to believe for the film to work. Still, while all of that stuff is easy, the toughest pill to swallow is having to believe that Sean Bean, of all people, survives this horror movie. What? The film follows an assassin called Voss, and the role Bean plays is Voss's prime target. So not only does John Pass have the Sean Bean death stink running against him, but he's also the sole focus of the protagonist's death gaze for a good chunk of the movie. Things seem as if they're geared for another Lord of the Rings or GoldenEye 4 bean, as Voss brutally attacks him with a fire poker, causing buckets worth of blood and seeming like the end for him. But in a shocking turn of events, it's revealed later on that he somehow survived this attack. It's almost as if Sean Bean stood up and said, "Nope, I'm done. This time I refuse to die." Ted Bowen in Friday the 13th Part 2. This guy might as well have a sign over his head saying, "Come on Jason, don't be shy." He was goofy, geeky, and a real jokester. All the hallmarks of a future member of the Friday the 13th body count. Yet, against all the odds, he made one wise decision and managed to make it out alive. The sequel to the first Friday the 13th movie needed fresh meat to quench the thirst of Jason's debuting machete. It was his first time taking on the major slaying duties for himself, which is why the crew of cannon fodder alongside the returning Alice Hardy was served up on a plate. Ted seemed like he'd be top of the menu on that crew, but he got out of Dodge at the right time. Had Ted actually remained in Camp Crystal Lake, he likely would have found himself meeting a grisly end. But the last you ever saw of the character was him asking about bars in the local area before sauntering off to get wasted. From there, he never returned, and it's safe to assume he probably didn't run into Jason in the bathroom of a rundown late-night bar. He survived thanks to his need to party. Now that's certainly one way to do it. Tallahassee in Zombieland. Surviving any horror is a miracle, but you've really got luck on your side if you manage to make it out of a zombie movie. On top of that, imagine taking the dead mentor trope into a place where death walks the streets. Boy, you'd better start writing a will because it doesn't look good. That's what many expected for Zombieland's Tallahassee, but it's hard to keep a good cowboy down. This character, played by the legendary Woody Harrelson, is the mentor to Jesse Eisenberg's Columbus in a world ravaged by the undead. He's badass, cool, and amusing, but his position as the mentor of the group makes you doubt he'll make it out alive. The character seemed destined for a heroic sacrifice akin to Obi-Wan or Gandalf. The movie's climax starts to pay this off as Tallahassee distracts a massive horde of zombies by leading them away from our other protagonists. He then locks himself in a booth with only 2 pistols and sets himself up for an epic final hurrah. But this never comes, as Tallahassee genuinely kills all the monsters with his limited weaponry. It came as a big surprise that Harrelson's character made it through Zombieland and Zombieland Double Tap, which shows you never really know what's going to happen in a zombie flick. Jake endures the revenge. Terrible sequels are a rite of passage for horror franchises, and the Jaws series goes right in for the kill with them. The worst of the bunch has to be the so bad it's good Jaws the Revenge, which comes with some shocking, if illogical, surprises. This character's survival is certainly one of them. Jake is the best friend of Michael, one of the leading characters, and the son of Martin and Ellen Brody, and thus you instantly assume Jake will be a tasty snack for the villainous shark. The best friend figure in a movie with a killer monster? Yeah, good luck, Jake. To make this even worse, he came as close to death as one can get. During the film, Jake fell directly into the jaws of the killer shark and was dragged away as his blood drenched the waters. It was easy to assume Jake was done, kaput, dead. But after the shark was taken care of, Jake miraculously showed up in the middle of the sea, having sustained non-life-threatening injuries. What? The film's original cut acknowledged the unlikeliness of this, as Jake initially died in the attack, but the revised ending retconned this and chose to have him survive instead, because being taken into the mouth of a killer shark is hardly a death sentence, apparently. James Foster in Infinity Pool. Death fake-outs are an essential part of the movie industry, and this film is in many ways entirely based on that concept. James Foster, played by Alexander Skarsgård, goes through some major trauma in Infinity Pool, and the fact that he makes it out alive is something nobody could have predicted. The film takes place in a fictional country named Litolka. It follows a couple on vacation to the oppressive location who soon learn about a bizarre legal procedure after committing manslaughter in a hit and run. The country allows people to pay a hefty fee that creates a double to incur the death penalty in their place. James, who is forced to witness his clone die, soon spirals into chaos as he befriends a group of rich tourists who use their wealth to exploit the system for their own hedonistic desires. The movie is full of fake-out moments that make you think you're witnessing a character's death only to realise it was one of the doubles. This already makes you convinced James is destined for death, but it gets even worse after you discover that the group is also torturing him for their own amusement. Ultimately, it seems like James is doomed, as these folk can kill him with no consequences. But they don't, and he ends the film as a hollow yet living shell of himself. Amber Sweet in Repo the Genetic Opera. Wait, so you've got Paris Hilton in your movie filled to the brim with gory as hell violence and a boatload of murder, and you don't kill her off? That's like being offered trail mix and picking the raisins. The criminally underrated Repo the Genetic Opera is a bizarre yet thrilling horror experience that combines bloody mayhem with toe-tapping songs. However, one of the biggest shocks is that the filmmakers had the chance to kill off the infamous Paris Hilton and didn't take it. Hilton appears in the movie as the spoiled daughter of the powerful and rich antagonist, a role she's undoubtedly accustomed to. She ultimately does a great job in the film, but the viewers expecting her to bite the bullet House of Wax style were let down in the end. The film even teases some destruction for Amber as her face literally falls off during a gruesome singing performance. Yet not only is she still alive by the film's climax, she has inherited her father's company and is set to become the most influential person in the world. Who could have seen that coming? He in Antichrist. Willem Dafoe has been through a lot on screen, but if you've seen Lars von Trier's Antichrist, you know it can always get worse. His character experiences plenty of pain in this one, and the whole movie seems set up to Dafoe's he 6 feet under. But as you can tell from the nature of this list, he defies the odds and makes it out alive. The movie follows a nameless husband and wife whose child fell out of a window while they were having sex. This guilt leads the wife, She, into a depressed spiral which the husband attempts to get her out of by taking She to a cabin in the woods. Yeah, because that always ends well. As the film unfolds, so does her sanity as she grows increasingly erratic, psychotic and violent. It's easy to assume Dafoe will eventually become a victim of this, as all stories in this vein tend to end with the husband dying. But despite all the horrendous torture he suffers and the already stacked odds against him, he manages to survive the film after eventually breaking free and strangling his wife. Derek in Bad Taste. When a director inserts themselves into their gloriously violent film, you can usually expect them to die. Quentin Tarantino blowing himself up in Django Unchained is a great example, and fans of the early work of Peter Jackson might have expected the same fate for Derek. But it wasn't meant to be. Jackson appeared as Derek in his first ever feature-length film, Bad Taste. The movie is a gross and over-the-top splatter flick that depicts an alien invasion in a small New Zealand town. Derek is incredibly meek and awkward in his introduction, but he's completely changed after a scrap with an alien causes him to fall off a cliff and crack his skull open. This accident forces Derek's brain to start dripping out of a hole in his head, which he fixes by wearing a hat. The fall itself already should have done him in, but the character goes wild from there on out, losing his sanity and becoming a blood-crazed alien-hunting psycho. The combination of the director playing the character, his initially pathetic presentation, and the horrible injuries he sustains should have kept Derek down for the count. Yet, while he was completely insane by the end, he was still breathing. Wallace in Tusk. Wallace is a character who, in many respects, would have been better off had he not survived this movie. Still, he surprised everyone by making it through to the end of Tusk, and that is not the happy ending it should be. For the uninitiated, Tusk is a bizarre-as-hell Kevin Smith movie that follows an arrogant podcast host who is held captive by a madman and slowly turned into a walrus. Yep, really. It's a grotesque body horror that sees a character go through unimaginable torment, and it's easy to predict his death towards the end, despite it never coming. Wallace concludes the film having been entirely converted into the tusked beast, living as a miserable animal who has seemingly lost all of his humanity. Most viewers would assume he'd be mercy killed to spare him from this fate worse than death. However, that's not what happens, as Wallace is sent to a wildlife sanctuary where he lives as a walrus. This awful fate is one of the worst in horror, and Wallace could have easily avoided it had he died instead. Despite death being the most predictable outcome, it never happens. Julia in Watcher. Many of the entries on this list are focused on characters who sustained awful injuries and pulled through, but Julia takes the cake in that regard, as she should have never made it out of what happened to her and her throat. Watcher is a simple yet effective horror that terrifies you with stranger danger and the feeling of helplessness that comes from being stalked. Julia is an unfortunate victim of this, as she is haunted by a mysterious figure who watches her every move. The voyeurism eventually becomes violent in the climax, which sees Julia receive a knife slash to the side of her neck. The viewer then watches as she painfully crawls away before eventually slowing down and seemingly bleeding out, all while her murderer watches. Now, it's easy to assume a character is 100% done after this, as that's what movies and life has always taught people. But Julia is a trooper who somehow clings to life after getting her throat slashed. She even musters the ability to stand up and shoot the killer, implying she had faked her demise after crawling away to lure him into a false sense of security. You go, girl! Chris Washington in Get Out. Watching the struggle of Chris trying to survive in Get Out is the kind of thing the phrase edge of your seat was built for. This whole movie is a masterclass in tension and suspense, and there are very few moments where it seems like the hero will make it out. This is especially true in the climax, as every viewer thought the film would go in a different direction. That climax sees Chris escaping from the house of his tormentors, having just discovered his girlfriend was recruiting black men for a terrifying reason. He manages to fight her off and does some damage to her, but just as he's getting away, a cop car pulls up and she tries to paint Chris as the attacker. Naturally, everyone watching got a lump in their throat, as everyone up to date on American politics knew where this was going. Chris was about to die to illustrate a tragic yet important point. However, the movie got to have its cake and eat it too, by making you feel that way before relieving your anxiety as Chris's friend exited the car and saved him. Jordan Peele, the writer and director, revealed that the original ending would have seen Chris arrested. Thankfully, this brighter conclusion made the final cut instead. White Dewey Riley in Scream. The Scream franchise has a whole evidence locker full of iconic characters, including Sidney Prescott, Ghostface, Randy Meeks, Gale Weathers, and of course, Dewey Riley. Lovable and bumbling cop Dewey is a delightful veteran of Woodsboro, but you'd be lying if you thought he was going to survive the first movie. Dewey was presented as the perfect cannon fodder for the murderous Ghostface in Scream. He was kind, goofy, and somewhat cowardly, despite having a brave heart in the end. This made him feel like a guaranteed slasher flick victim, as seeing a likeable character get unfairly killed or sacrificing themselves for the greater good is common in the genre. Hell, Scream even worked hard to make you think this would happen after Riley was stabbed in the back by Ghostface. Yet, as Dewey proves, a good knife to the back isn't always the end. Not only does he survive this attempt, but he makes it through the whole movie and most of its sequels. Just because you're light comic relief doesn't mean you're destined for the chopping block, it seems.